I don't know about anyone else, but I recently watched The Long Walk and I cannot stop thinking about it. And I have been desperate to talk about it. I watched it with my little brother. What did you think about it?
I thought it was good.
Okay, you're done now. You're done. Okay, shut the door, please. Thank you. Love you. Anyway, I recently watched The Long Walk and I cannot stop thinking about it. I have been dying to talk about this film. So let's break down some of the themes and like metaphors and symbols in this film that I think makes it really relevant and really important. But this video is obviously going to contain spoilers for both the film and the book because the book is marginally different from the film. So if you don't want those, then go read it, go watch it, and then come back. If you didn't know, The Long Walk was originally a novel written by Stephen King and it was published in 1978. However, it was written under the alias Richard Bachman. The reason why King often chose to write under a pseudonym was because he wanted to turn the heat down a bit. In other words, after his debut novel Carrie was released in 1974, he wanted to see if his books were read because they were good books or because they were written by Stephen King. The premise of the narrative is pretty simple. It's set in a poverty-stricken dystopian society and the story follows a government-issued event called The Long Walk, where 100 young boys are drafted into a voluntary lottery and made to walk until there's one man standing. And what I mean by that is that these boys, if they were to drop under the pace of 4 miles per hour or to stop or to stray from the path, they would get a warning. If you get 3 warnings, you get your ticket, which comes in the form of a bullet in the head from the soldiers who are chaperoning the walk. They do get given rations and water, which I think comes in the form of meat paste in packets in the book. It's not really explored in the film, but it doesn't sound very appetizing. The winner of the walk receives an undisclosed but large sum of money and a prize which comes in the form of a wish. The winner is asked what their wish is and it's granted whatever it is, no questions asked. Also, in the film, their speed has to stay above 3 miles per hour, not 4 miles per hour, which I know has caused a bit of like confusion among everyone. And also in the film, it's 50 boys, not 100. You get the gist. The premise is pretty harrowing to think about. These young boys are being killed and forced to walk until they literally cannot anymore. These boys are being pushed to the brink of their mental and physical capacities, running on no sleep, barely any food, and also being literally face to face with the brutal death of the boys around them. The film adaptation is directed by Francis Lawrence, who is probably most recognised for directing the bulk of the Hunger Games films. And I've seen a lot of people compare The Long Walk to the Hunger Games, so it makes sense why a lot of people are drawing these conclusions. And also the dystopian environment really does add to that. And Francis Lawrence, I think, does a really great job of this. Francis Lawrence said that The Long Walk is his favourite King book and probably his favourite book of all time, so he really wanted to stay true to the message of the book, and he said it's his favourite despite it being one of King's most pessimistic novels. Freelance film programmer and writer Michael Blythe agrees with this, saying there is something relentlessly pessimistic about the nature of the story, lots of young people being killed. There were also a lot of literary influences which helped King to write the novel. Blythe goes on to explain how he's heard King talk about Lord of the Flies in 1984 as influences. With Lord of the Flies, King took inspiration from the relationship between the boys, the camaraderie and the sense of brotherhood that they have. In The Long Walk, despite their circumstances, the boys do become quite close. They trade stories and they uplift each other and they motivate each other. He also seeks to replicate the oppression of totalitarian governments as seen in 1984. For example, the seemingly omnipresent and simultaneously elusive character of the Major is very much like the Big Brother figure in 1984. Also, Shirley Jackson's short story The Lottery is also mentioned as one of King's influences. And now, I don't know if it's just me in my British secondary school, but we did this short story to death. I reread it all the time. We did loads of work on it. It's basically a dystopian short story about, it takes a Hunger Games-esque ballot or lottery, and whoever gets the card with the black dot on this lottery card, they get stoned to death. So, quite similar in terms of being drafted in the military style of that. Most interestingly, however, I read something where the book could possibly be alluding to Homer's The Odyssey as well. For example, when the main protagonist, Ray Garrity, realises that the walk is circling back to his hometown, he becomes increasingly homesick and upset despite having kept a level head throughout most of the walk. He talks about having to see his mother and his girlfriend again, saying, "I'm scared too, and homesick. I may see them, but I won't be able to touch them." This is in line with the theme of Nostos in the Odyssey, which is an ancient Greek literary term, which I hope I'm pronouncing right, and it's defined by a hero returning home from an epic quest. And while Odysseus' return home was quite epic and heroic, Garrity return to his hometown during the walk is anything but. He's broken, he's a lost soul, and he's not the boy he was at the start of the walk. And this is reinforced in the film with Garrity. He runs over to his mother and he's pleading for forgiveness for having begun the walk in the first place and having to put her through that. And most importantly, and probably most well known, the main influence for The Long Walk was of course the Vietnam War. King wrote the novel in 1966 and 1967, so it was during the peak of this time in America. Obviously, the similarities lie in the young boys being drafted for a military event which will ultimately lead to their death, much like the American soldiers in the Vietnam War. The paradox of boys in the prime of their life being killed is really apparent in The Long Walk, and it really explores the horror of that, and it mirrors the horrors of the war and the bleak, unnatural quality of it. The walk itself is read in an allegory for war. It's ultimately pointless. These boys are walking hundreds of miles for days and going through all of this trauma and hardship for no purpose because there's no finish line. It's just death, government control, and raw, unfiltered horror. Common praise for this novel and the film lies in each of the characters. They're individually fleshed out, each representing different qualities and criticisms of the system. Despite the dehumanization of these boys, the numbers they're referred to by, the way they're killed lawlessly like animals, get back to that, remain to the audience and to each other as wholly human. And one thing I do really like about this film as well, which is beyond the story, this is about the production. I really like how we had a lot of new faces. We've had David Johnson was in Rye Lane. I think some of them have been in other things which they might be well known for, but I think they did a really good job in casting new people and new faces. I'm just going to take a moment now to go through some characters and what I think they symbolize and what they represent, because like I say, I think the characters are really the main selling point for this film and the book and its success. So as I've mentioned, Ray Garrity is the protagonist of the film and the book. He becomes close friends with Peter McVrees, who you could argue is his literary foil, perhaps why they work so well together. During the walk, Ray confides in Peter, telling him what he would wish for if he won, which is important in understanding his character and his motives. We learn that Ray's father often spoke out against the system, criticising the authoritarian regime. This leads to his father being dragged out of the house one night by soldiers, and in front of Ray and his mother, the Major tells his father to pledge allegiance to the government and to himself, which his father ultimately refuses. Before he is shot in front of them in the street, his father tells Ray to remember who he is and to stay true to himself. Ray carries this with him and internalizes it, and he tells Peter that at the end of the walk, if he wins, he's going to ask for his wish to be the carbine that the soldier has, and he's going to shoot the Major with it. Ray is the quintessential hero figure in the narrative. Not only being the protagonist, he does embody this determination in the face of strife, and also this unbridled, almost masculine anger that's bred from hatred. He states that we started this walk with legs, we finish it with will. The continuous present tense denotes his resilience, and the metaphor he uses symbolises that he recognises the shift from the physical toll to the mental toll that this walk is taking on all of them. They're running on no sleep, they're becoming delirious, they're really having to push themselves mentally to get through this. Ray can ironically be read as the symbolic son of America, with his resolution and heroic qualities. He is the ideal soldier, being everything that he stands against. And the system, they feed on boys like Ray, using their will for both entertainment and for control. As I mentioned, Peter McVrees is both similar and different to Ray. They are alike in their determination, with Peter's endurance being really memorable throughout the film, but their attitudes are where they are most different. Peter is acutely aware of the brutality of the system, yet he remains an unwavering beacon of hope. In the book, he expresses that the reason all of this is so horrible is because it's just trivial, you know? We've sold ourselves and traded our souls on trivialities. This is important because it tells us that Peter's optimism isn't naivety. He's not stupid, he's just hopeful. He tells Ray about the struggles he's faced in life. He lost his parents at a young age and was raised by an alcoholic uncle who beat him. He says he feels like he's been walking his whole life because of this. I've seen a lot of people mention how while the other characters in the film, they become increasingly exhausted as it goes on. They become like less talkative, they become less optimistic, but it seems like Peter doesn't really. He seems to carry this motivation throughout, and I think that that is a testament to this. He's been walking his whole life, he's used to these hardships, and that's why he doesn't face the strife as much as the other boys do, at least not physically. In the face of evil, he constantly chooses love, setting him apart from the other boys who have succumbed to the anger and the cruelty that the system breeds. When Ray tells him about his plan to execute the Major, Peter challenges him. "Vengeance, Ray. Vengeance is not enough," he tells Ray. "It takes a certain type of man to kill someone." Taking on this humanitarian perspective, Peter is also rather poetic in the book and in the film. In the book, he tells Ray to "just go on dancing with me like this forever, Garrity, and I'll never tire. We'll scrape our shoes on the stars and hang upside down from the moon." which I think is just so upsetting. But this blend of poetic metaphors and borderline madness encapsulates Peter's character for me. His mental and physical endurance is both noble and doomed from the beginning. It's recognised and pointed out early on that Art Baker is a religious character. He represents morality and kindness in the face of hatred, which makes his death even more sad. His nose begins to continuously bleed, most likely because of a rupture in his brain. During his final moments, he speaks to Peter and Ray, lamenting about his grandma, saying wistfully how, "My grandma used to put ice on my nose when I had a nosebleed." He comes to a gradual realisation that he can walk no more, and before he slows to a stop, sacrificing himself, he gives Ray a cross necklace and asks that whoever wins gives it to his grandma. This archaic grandma figure and the symbol of the cross necklace are deliberately brought up during the time of Art's death, reminding us of his religion and his values. It tells us that his kindness and his morality is not valued in cruel societies like these. His death could stand as a symbol of the deterioration of religion's influence as society moves forward, leaving behind the messages of peace and togetherness in favour of greed and malice. When Art dies, he makes Peter and Ray promise that they won't watch. He says, "Promise me you won't look." This final act stands as an attempt for him to keep his dignity, and also so as not to perpetuate this horrible cycle of the boys having to watch their friends die. Barkovich is an unlikable character in the book and in the film. He is erratic, aggressive, and enjoys tormenting the other boys. At the start of the walk, he provokes another boy with teasing remarks until this boy attempts to swing at him, leading to his death when he falls over and cannot continue in the walk. This action is met with contempt by the other boys, earning Barkovich the nickname Killer for the remainder of the walk. However, Barkovich isn't emotionless. He is actually immediately penitent after he causes this other boy's death. Later, he practically begs for forgiveness from the other boys and expresses how sorry he is for having caused it. So while he's portrayed for most of the film and the book as a cold antagonist, he's merely another victim of this oppressive system. The regime turns victims against each other, breeding cruel and toxic rebellion as a way to keep boys under control. This leaves Barkovich unable to form friendships with the other boys, and he is consumed with guilt and anger. This also stands as a representation of the importance of camaraderie. Without it, Barkovich suffers and succumbs to his grief. He ends up killing himself in the end, in perhaps the most gruesome on-screen death. In the film, he uses a spoon to stab himself, and in the book, he takes a step further and rips his own throat out. Olsen is a deliberately generic character meant to represent the countless average youth drafted into the Vietnam War. He has faith in the system and believes that if he treats the walk like a game, he can be successful. Olsen trains, he studies, he gives himself every physical advantage that he can, but it still isn't enough. His death in the book is more gradual than in the film, as he becomes so physically exhausted that he is a shell of the person he once was. When he recognises that he can no longer continue in the film, he chooses not to go out quietly. He turns and makes a run for the soldier's gun behind them. This act of rebellion is, however, unsuccessful, and he's shot in the stomach. Being shot in the stomach is giving him a slow and painful death, and I forget who it is, but one of the other boys says, "Why won't they just finish him off?" And someone else replies, "They're keeping him as a symbol, so no one else tries to do that." Peter ends up rushing back in an attempt to be there for Olsen in his final moments, where he expresses frantically and heartbreakingly, "I did it all wrong." Ray manages to drag Peter away from Olsen, aware that if Peter stays behind for too long that he will also suffer a similar fate, and Ray actually begs Peter, he says, "I can't lose you too." As they continue walking, having no choice but to leave Olsen behind to bleed out, Olsen continues to scream, "I did it all wrong." While it seems like he's referring to his failed attempt to grab the gun, Olsen's harrowing final message relates to his and the other boys' misplaced trust in the system. They all enter the walk for different reasons, some like Ray even to put a stop or a dent in the authoritarian regime. However, this brash attempt at rebellion is ultimately fruitless. There is no right tactic in escaping cruelty, and in believing that there is, they were all wrong. Collie Parker represents the silent rage of the indigenous people who are silenced by history. He embodies the real long walk. He becomes increasingly homesick and afraid during the walk, reflecting the homesick indigenous children forced into American residential schools. These children will ultimately have unmarked graves and be wiped from history. His death is a symbol of rebellion and resistance, as he also attempts to take a soldier's gun. He does manage to shoot one of them, but then is immediately taken out by a flurry of shots from other soldiers. Parker falls to his knees and shows his bloody hands to the camera after he's been shot in the stomach. The red handprint is often used as a symbol of silenced Native Americans, painted over their mouths to symbolise the fact that they have been silenced by history. Parker's last words are a Sioux memorial song that he sings to himself, meant to prepare souls for the afterlife. This touching moment reflects on Parker's culture and, more importantly, the silencing of it in modern America. Often the audience are reminded of the character's traits at the time they're dying to make their death more sad and more symbolic, just like with Colin Parker's. Curly is the first boy to die in the walk. His death is abrupt and early to reinforce the cruelty of the system and to show that no one is safe. Meeting the boys with the bleak reality of the walk, much like the young soldiers in Vietnam would have been immediately met with the bleak and harsh reality of war. Curly represents the vulnerable youth and how their random misfortune can be deadly. He is the ultimate symbol of those fallen in the Vietnam War. They were young and they were innocent and they were vulnerable. Before he's shot, he cradles his head and is on the floor in a fetal-like position, which reinforces his helplessness. He screams, "It ain't fair," a simple, heartbreaking statement which sums up the brutality of warfare. Harkness is a self-insert character for King in the sense that his goal is to write a book about the walk from an insider's perspective. He begins cheerful, optimistic, talkative, and engaging with the other boys. However, he suffers one of the most memorable deaths because of its gruesome nature. While walking, his ankle becomes broken, twisting underneath him. He has no choice but to continue walking on partially exposed bone for hours until he finally gives up, sobbing and begging for help because "my ankle's all twisted up." This leads to him being obviously unable to continue in the walk and he's killed. This death bears striking resemblance to Ray's horses being put down after an injury. Once he can no longer fulfill his role as the walker, he's mercilessly executed, just like these animals would be. There are numerous shots of horses in the film, which furthers this imagery and reinforces the dehumanization of the boys under the cruel system. Importantly, Harkness never gets to finish his book, and this represents censorship and the silencing of free thinkers. The system doesn't want people to know about the inside perspective of the walk. They just want obedient followers who don't understand the mechanics of the machine. Stebbins is a really important character in the book, but his role in the film is diluted a bit, I think, to make way for Ray and Peter's brotherly relationship. In the book, he is the penultimate survivor and not Ray. It is when Stebbins finally collapses that Ray becomes the final survivor and wins. As the illegitimate son of the Major, which he reveals towards the end of the walk, Stebbins represents the consequences of authoritarian power and ultimately the disparity of it. What's important about Stebbins, however, is what he refers to himself as. He refers to himself as a rabbit. In a dwindling state of mental stability, Stebbins compares the walkers to greyhounds in a dog race, calling himself the rabbit used to get the dogs to run. He tells Ray how they first used real rabbits for this and then realised afterwards they could use mechanical ones because they ran faster and couldn't be caught by the dogs. He says, "Maybe we should stop being rabbits and pigs and goats and sheep and just be people, real people who bleed. But I guess this rabbit is flesh and blood, and this flesh and blood is failing." This is important because in the book, when we reach the final part, it's titled "The Rabbit." When Stebbins falls and makes Ray the winner, Ray doesn't stop walking. He hallucinates another walker in front of him and starts running to catch them. If Stebbins is the original rabbit of flesh and blood, making Ray keep walking until the end to be the sole survivor, then the imaginary dark figure that Ray chases is the mechanical rabbit. Now Ray has been trained like a dog to keep walking, to be obedient to the system as they want him to be. He chases this mechanical rabbit that he will never be able to reach. He chases this idea that one day the metaphorical walk will end, but it never will and he'll never be able to catch up to the mechanical rabbit. That's the ending of the book anyway. The film's ending is still slightly philosophical, but it takes on a completely different approach. In the film, the final two are Ray and Peter. Stebbins gives up just before them, but makes sure to tell them, "I'm glad it's you two." As they reach the end of the walk, crowds have gathered, desperate to see who will win, which I think is very Hunger Games-esque. Amidst the crowd, Peter tries to sacrifice himself, casting a lasting glance at Ray before stopping altogether. Ray notices this though, and he runs back to drag Peter up again. He begs him to keep walking with him just for a little while, and Peter agrees, walking beside him. Only for Ray to then sacrifice himself, and he stops walking and he is shot. What ensues is perhaps the most heartbreaking scene in the film, with Peter asking, "What did you do? What did you do?" and clinging to Ray as he bleeds out. Ray tells Peter, "I can't see it, but you can. That's why I love you." Now Peter, initially a symbol of hope and love, who told Ray not to seek revenge on the Major, he now stands alone as the last man standing. The crowd is cheering him on. The soldiers are dragging him away from Ray to receive his prize. And after shooting Ray, the Major stands in front of Peter and asks him what his one wish is, and Peter wishes for the carbine that the soldier has. After a tense moment, he fulfills Ray's wish and he shoots the Major. Peter has now become the type of person capable of killing. His hope has been destroyed in favour of violence and cruelty, symbolising war and its traumatising effect on the young men who returned home from the Vietnam War. This moment is pivotal as we see the reversal of character roles, Peter becoming consumed by wrath and vengeance, whereas in his last moments, Ray displays the noble qualities of penitence and acceptance, and he lays his trust in Peter's optimism. After he kills the Major, however, it's left ambiguous as to whether or not Peter suffers a similar fate. He most likely does, but we aren't shown that. The people fade away, and instead of running or raising his gun again, Peter simply turns around and continues to walk down a long road. This is the moment that tells us that the film doesn't have a happy ending. The metaphorical walk continues. Another Major will come into power, the long walk will happen again, and the sacrifices these boys have made have ultimately meant nothing. Just like how Olsen was saying, they've done it all wrong. They've played a part in this regime, they've been pawns in the game, and there's nothing they can do. Simon Brown, author of the book Screening Stephen King, adaptation in the horror genre and film, says that King is not a pessimist. He believes in the power of common decency, and most of his books end with whatever monster is being defeated. But in The Long Walk, the monster has not been defeated. The story is one of bleak destruction, tarnation of hope and innocence, and the horrors of cruelty and war, and it ends just as harrowing as it begins. There's probably so much more I've missed about this film in terms of like symbolism and stuff. I know there's so much animal imagery, the rabbits, the cows, the horses, it really all is so well thought out, and I think that I really love this film so much. I cannot tell you how much I love this film. For me, it's probably my current favourite film adaptation of any Stephen King novel, and I think that Francis Lawrence did a brilliant job, and so did everyone else involved. Anyway, that's all. Thank you for watching, and let me know if there's anything that you think I missed or you want to add.